My question is, how do I manage my month-to-month cash flow, my year-to-year cash flow? How do I start my own business? How do I do these things? Where is the best place for my money to reside? So how do you do that? What is the best way to do that? And it's not to just pile up hundreds of thousands of dollars in some kind of like tax qualified account that's locked away that you have to wait until you retire to touch, right? That's not the solution. People have to make so much more in investments just to make up for the fact that they're giving up all this money in interest now, in their day-to-day and their month-to-month life. So that's a big thing that we see all the time. But once they get it, once they read the book, they're going to say, okay, I don't want to do the smallest anymore. I'm restructuring how my money flows, and that is going to make my life better.
Well, Luke, thank you for joining us on the Infinite Banking Initiative. We want to start off just by hearing your story and how you discovered the infinite banking concept, or was it you read Becoming Your Own Banker first? Which one happened?
Yeah, sure. And so thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and have this talk today. I kind of got into this through the libertarian world. And so, if you want the whole story, it's because we were drinking raw milk in a roundabout way. So down in Texas, I met my wife. She said, hey, let's go out to this raw milk farm outside of town. We started to get to know the farmers out there, and they had this big kind of, they called it a family farm day, where, you come out and see speakers and they talk about GMO food and all that stuff. And somebody at one of the tables was talking about Ron Paul. I didn't know who Ron Paul was. My wife didn't know who that was. This gentleman said, hey, he's the only person who seems to care that, there's all these armed federal agencies and all this stuff. And it just really kind of sent us on this thing. And so then I'm reading Frederick Bastiat and all these, libertarian Austrian economic thinkers, all this stuff. And after a period of time, I started to listen to the Tom Woods Show, which is, I guess, probably the biggest libertarian show out there as far as podcasts go. And one day, Bob Murphy, or Robert P. Murphy, however we want to present it, he's talking about something completely unrelated on the Tom Woods Show. And he mentions just at the end of an episode, he says, hey, we're putting out this new podcast. It's called The Laura Murphy Show, and it's about infinite banking. Or he didn't even say that. He said IBC. I said, well, I don't know what IBC is, but I have a very, very high opinion of Dr. Murphy. And so I said, well, I'm going to check that out. Whatever that is, it must be important. So that's kind of how I first found it. I started at the first episode of the podcast. And they say, well, you got to read Becoming Your Own Banker. And, I keep that right next to me at all times. And so I did. And I read it and thought, that doesn't make any darn sense at all. I can't, there's no way that's true. There's no way that makes any sense. But I kind of did this back and forth. Bob is a really, really smart guy. He's probably like the smartest living economist. He's got a lot of stuff figured out. He's really correct. He's very, very nuanced, and will take the time, even in a hostile interview, to go, well, you got to think through this part and then think through that part. And if that's true, then this must be true. And it didn't make sense to me. But just because, my opinion of Bob, I just kind of went, well, okay, but it must be right. I'm not figuring it out. So I went back through the book. I listened to more podcast episodes, and I read articles on the infinitebanking.org website, and I just kind of kept doing that and kept doing that. And then it all clicked at a certain point. There wasn't really a specific moment, but that inside of, you always pay interest no matter what, right? You're paying interest when you spend cash, just the same as you're paying interest when you take out a loan. That really got me eventually. The first time I read it, didn't make any sense, but eventually it did, and so here we are, more or less, from that point. I just, when it all clicks, when you don't have objections, what left is there? It's just, oh, obviously this is true. There's nothing I can say that isn't true about it. So, that's maybe the short version, but that's how it happened.
So Laura Murphy Report, Bob and Carlos did both a podcast, also a monthly publication called the LMR, and they used to write economic articles from the Austrian perspective, the free market perspective, and their podcast. They did that for a long time. And Bob's not with us anymore. The Nelson Nash Institute, but Carlos obviously is. But we do have all the LMR issues and articles, and also the podcast resident on our Nelson Nash Institute website, infinitebanking.org. If anybody cares to go back and listen to them, and they're all relevant, even though they're written and spoken in a current event context. So So you listened to the very first episode when it was released for the LMR?
I mean, right after, I guess, because they had just launched it. So I think there was maybe 2 episodes whenever I first started listening. But yeah, right there at the beginning.
That was quite a while ago when that first one came out. Yeah.
And we actually recommend that on our website too, for people who are just, coming across this concept now today. How do you get started with IBC? There's 2 of those Laura Murphy Report podcasts that we recommend to everyone, just kind of as a great starting block for them. So anyone who's listening and is brand new to this, just know that's there for you as a resource. So Luke, what was some of your first challenges when you first started? So, you said you just kept on reading and researching until it finally clicked with you. So what were some of those challenges early on when it finally clicked and you're like, okay, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to implement this. Can you share some of those with us?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, it's part of it is just the overall thing. I think I should distinguish between, specific concerns and then also just the whole thing. It's like, well, nobody's doing this. Nobody is talking about this. How could this possibly be correct? I'm a little bit of a contrarian with a lot of things. And so I like to find the cool, different idea. But it just took me a long time to kind of wrap my head around that. And so specifically, like I say, the idea that you're always paying interest, well, I don't need to recapture interest if I'm not paying interest, right? We were in the Dave Ramsey sort of mindset, and we were paying down our mortgage whenever I was first discovering this. And so it's like, well, we're just making extra payments on the mortgage. We're going to get out of debt. We're going to not have to finance things. That's our thinking, right? But of course, again, you finance everything you buy. And so what are you giving up by paying cash? And, other challenges were, well, I'm probably going to need a lot of money to do this. There's going to be this seems like a really cool rich person thing, and clients will say that all the time. But it's, I don't know, can I even do this? Do I have anything I need to finance? We already bought a house. Shouldn't I just pay cash for my next car and then not worry about it? Is it worth the time and effort to sort of model repayments over a long period of time? Why do I need to do that? It's me kind of being stuck in other ways of thinking. Right before I discovered IBC, I was simultaneously reading a lot of the books behind me and stuff, economics books and stuff about income tax and economics and, Man, Economy and State by Murray Rothbard, just real dense econ stuff. And, there's nothing about it in there, right? So how do I not know this yet? But at the same time, I'm also reading I think it's called The Great Courses, that whole series, how to analyze financial markets, how to understand, different aspects of the global economy, and those kind of things. And it's like, well, nobody's talking about it here either, and they're all concerned with stock prices and things that I don't even think about on a day-to-day basis now, right? But it's like, well, if you want to invest, if you want to get rich, if you want to do these things, you need to go and you need to put your money in a 401k, and all the kind of standard advice. I was right in the middle of that. Then going into IBC and trying to master both of those at the same time. And so y'all know that just doesn't really necessarily line up. It's not that page 1 of Becoming Your Own Banker says, okay, I want you to go out and cancel your 401k. But, you see the world a little differently after you understand what's in that book. And so I would say just the very, very foreign nature of it. And also it's kind of parables, Becoming Your Own Banker is, here's a story about a grocery store. And you're like, what? I thought I was reading a book about money, you know? and here's a story about, you know, flying an airplane. Here's a story, you know, and it's like, am I still reading a finance book? Am I just dumb? You know, am I missing something here? But I've made it a habit ever since that first time. You know, I've read it multiple times the very first year that I discovered IBC and Nelson's work and everything. And I read, you know, Building Your Warehouse of Wealth and all the books. But I reread Becoming Your Own Banker every year, at least one time. You know, now I do it on audio, but, you know, and we pull this thing out with clients all the time. And it's like, okay, let's go to page, you know, whatever situation we're dealing with. But the very first time you read it, you go, I don't know that I got financial advice from this. There are tables of numbers, but it's not really about that. It's about how you think. It's about how your brain works. You know, what are you doing to self-sabotage in your own life? And if you stop doing those things, your financial life will get better. But it's like, that's the consequence. That's not necessarily the point. And so that's kind of the struggle that I went through, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to cover the struggle, because most people just dismiss it. Okay, they don't take the time and energy to figure out what the heck's going on. As Nelson always said, the infinite banking concept is an exercise in imagination, reason, logic, and prophecy. Okay, he touches every one of those, and folks get bored with it. Like, they say, "You wasted my time." But, you know, 1/3 of the book is talks about the human condition, the human problem. Because if you can't overcome that, then you know, this is just nothing but talk anyway. So there you go.
Now that you have been, you know, practicing IBC in your personal life, you know, can you talk a little bit about how that has, you know, changed your life and your family's life? And, you know, can you speak on that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. And, you know, we were not in the best of financial shape when I was first discovering this. You know, I was reading books about money and trying to figure out how to put ourselves on a better financial path. You know, obviously, if we can get rid of the mortgage payment, that'll be great. So let's focus on the mortgage payment. You know, let's pay down the debt and all that stuff. But while we're doing that, I started talking to other practitioners. I talked to a couple of people before I settled with someone to work with. You know, I'm a user of IBC before I got into the business and all that. And I started probably the smallest policy, excuse me, that I could possibly start. It's about $30 a month, you know. And that was like, my wife didn't get it and she wasn't going to read the book. You know, it was just, there's a little thing of mine, this, you know, okay, you can do that if you really want to, you know, we're kind of broke, but go for it. That kind of a, you know, mindset at that time. And so, I mean, I used it for teeny tiny little stuff. I bought some silver with it and then repaid it over time. I bought some stock that I thought was attractive at the time because I was reading my stock trading stuff at that moment. And, you know, I made some money on that. That was cool. But, you know, teeny tiny, right? It's like, I still have that policy and it's got a few $1,000s in it, but the annual premium, you know, we now pay annually. The annual premium is $360, right? And so it's not really life-changing money in there, even though, you know, we could buy a really cheap used car maybe with it at this point. But then it's kind of like, okay, I understand the principles. You know, yes, it's too small to do anything huge, but, you know, could we take a little piece of the mortgage and put it under our control, right? Could we take a policy loan and move a few $100s over into our kind of system and kind of play with that? Yeah, we could, right? Could we do, you know, anything? And lots of little stuff that I played with, you know. And of course, now my wife is all on board, but that's after I wrote my own book and, you know, all this other stuff, right? But that was a lot of fun at first because it's just like, wow, it does work. You know, wow, they didn't ask me, when am I going to make my repayments? You know, they didn't ask me to like prove my income or anything. It's my tool and I can use it how I want to. And so, you know, we went through a real big change after kind of the COVID stuff happened. And so 2022, the end of 2021 really we moved to Arkansas from Texas. And so we, got new phone numbers, switched cars, switched houses, switched states, and reset everything in a big way. And I started opening bigger policies, and I started my own agency instead of staying with one of the big four financial firms where I was before, and really just kind of leaned in all the way to this. We're not paying $300 a year in premium anymore, right? It's a lot of premium, and I love paying it. And the office that I'm talking to you in was built with policy loans. David, you have a wonderful video where you talk about how you first realized that IBC was a little different. You can take a policy loan and you can structure it like a construction loan and kind of, use it to do things a little differently than you normally would. And I hadn't watched that video at the time, but that's basically what we did. I don't even know if that video was made yet, but that's what we did. I would take a policy loan. I would talk to our guy that was working on the office, and okay, how much am I going to owe you in a couple of weeks? And okay, I'm going to structure this, and that's what we did. It was great. As easy as can be. If the check was 1 day late or something from the insurance company, because that's my fault, I have to apologize to them or whatever. But it was really, really painless, and the bank didn't need to know what I was doing. It's nice financial privacy and kind of do those things. Yeah. And so, that's probably the biggest example. But, I paid my income tax with this. I've, done all kinds of stuff with it. So personal life, it's so much more peaceful. There's no stress in our life because we've got layers and layers of financial security because of this. It's not, oh my gosh, we've got this big payment we got to pay on the house or whatever. We're debt free out here too, as far as the house that we live in. And so, okay, cool. I don't have to stress out about somebody knocking to ask for their pay, for some debt that I'm financing. If I don't send a check or log on to the website and pay the insurance company, they don't care. They'll send me a letter and say, hey, you've accrued this much interest. But, that's really not the worst thing in the world. I understand that I need to spread that out over time and to pay it back, and play honest banker with myself and all those things. So it just feels great.
It all started with Tom Woods, huh?
It sure did.
See, it's funny where these little paths start and where they end, So it's interesting commentary. So, I was going to say that, the insurance company doesn't care if you're going to pay the loan back as long as you pay the premium, right? So
right.
That's key. And when you talk about Nelson's book, grocery store stories, airplane stories, the airplane story is a headwind, tailwind story. So it's like, it's not, everything he talked about was in parables, like you said, and he was proud of that, man. His model was the apostles and Jesus. So he wanted to replicate that way to communicate what he thought was biblical truth, so
it shows a mastery of the information. It's not just like, there are plenty of financial books out there that you can tell that the author just figured something out and they're super excited about it, and they really don't have a broad context for their writing. It's like, oh my gosh, you need to invest in this because I'm going to make money if you do. That's what the book is, right? Nelson's book is not like that at all. It speaks to, years, decades, of very, very focused knowledge, very, deep understanding of the material and how it fits in with other things. As the Austrian econ nerd, that really stood out to me reading it. And the back of the book is a bunch of Austrian economics, hey, you should also read this and you should also read this. And then I thought, wow, I've already read some of those, that's pretty cool. So it fits in with a broader worldview. It's not just go buy this shiny new financial product because it's got high rates of return, or whatever. So that really I can't think of another financial book that is that way. It's a unique thing.
Well, yeah, there's two primary premises in the book that my takeaway, besides the human condition, that is, you have to understand how to run a business successfully. Okay, that's number one. And he always said that when you buy a policy that you're planning on using for the infinite banking concept, it's a business startup. Okay, so you have to understand what that means and what it looks like and how you can responsibly manage that cash flow and grow your business. Okay, the second piece was that everybody's in two professions in their life. You can be a doctor, you can be a lawyer, you can be whatever, but your second business needs to be as a banker. Okay, banking, because that's how you accelerate your worth, and that's how you control your wealth. So business owners, take heed. This, IBC is for you guys. Families that manage your family finances on a monthly basis, this is for you. It's for everybody. And you talked about starting at $30 a month premium. The beautiful thing about IBCs is scalable. The only limitation is insurability, either on you or your sphere of individuals that you have insurable interest in. You can scale it as you can, financially or, whatever. So
people ask you, potential clients, like in a first call or something, they'll ask, how big can I go? How much can I put in here? And usually the answer is, don't worry about it, because your insurability is going to be massive, compared to how much you're probably going to be able to do this right now. But rest assured, we'll have some room and we can keep going. We'll get there if we can to the limits. But you don't worry about that if you have no policies.
Yeah,
it's
just
plenty
be careful of those term riders, though, man.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a necessary evil. Well, not an evil, but it's a necessary tool to get where you want to go. Just don't go crazy with it.
Well, no, look, I appreciate that you did your due diligence with yourself, trying this out at first by yourself and just saying, does this really work the way that they say that it works? And you went through that process and you scaled it. And so I think that makes you just a better, practitioner of this for your clients, an advisor for your clients, because you have lived it and you've gone down that journey and you can share that with your clients. And, how do you handle, though, if you have somebody who approaches you and they've heard some of the noise that's out there, thanks to social media and the misconceptions about the infinite banking concept? How do you address those with those clients?
Yeah, I think Nelson was very, very insightful. On a huge number of topics, but especially in this, idea that you have to have a mind that's ready to accept some new ideas, right? And so, I had a meeting a couple of months ago with a couple of business partners. One of them listens to the Tom Woods show. I've been on that program twice. And he heard my more recent episode and was super excited and, excited to meet me and talk to me and all this. And it was great. And the other guy just couldn't get his mind out of the box of rates of return, right? He just couldn't, no matter what, it was an hour-long call, and no matter what I said, it didn't seem to matter to him, it's just like, but I can put the same money in the S&P 500 and I'll make more money faster. And then I can do this, and it just, so it's a closed box. If your mind is a closed box, you can't, absorb any new information, right? Whether that's IBC or whether it's anything else. And so, Nelson thankfully has a lot of great resources for how to handle some of these objections in the book. If you get toward the end of the book, then he's going to walk you through, well, what if I'm not insurable? What if I can get a higher rate of return? All those things. But, there's nothing you can do without someone who wants to have the conversation. If they're not willing to accept, some kind of alternative perspective, then it is what it is. But when people do have an open mind and they're willing to kind of get into it a little bit, that's the most fun part of doing this as a profession. That's why I'm never going to stop doing it, right? Because you help people, you see the light bulb turn on whenever they go, oh yeah, you're right about that. Or they call you 2 weeks later, gosh, my close family member of mine, I'm kind of getting off topic, but he called me a couple of years after we started his policy. Actually, almost 3 years is when my book came out, and he read my book. He called me and was like, wait a minute, you're telling me that I can do this and this and this with my policy? And he's my very first client. So the very first whole life policy I ever sold as an agent. He did it because we're close, and, it was, to him, it's like, well, I need insurance, I'm married, I need to do this. But it finally kind of clicked for him. I'm like, see, I told you. You remember we talked about this, but it's just, you kind of like have those objections or those things that you kind of have to work through on your own terms, So as far as things that I see all the time, I mean, obviously the rate of return thing, and what do you say to that? Well, okay. I like to use the example of pretend you need drinking water. Okay. You say, I bought some land. I have water under the ground. I want to drill a well and get water because I need to have drinking water to wash my dishes and bathe and do things like regular day-to-day stuff. And then I, the cool finance guy, show up and say, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy you 600 acres in a different state, and I'm going to buy you books on how to build your own private lake, and we're going to fill this thing up, and it's going to take us about 20 years, but we're going to build the biggest, most awesome vat of water you've ever seen. And it's like, well, what are you talking about, right? That has nothing to do with solving your day-to-day need for water, or as we're talking about, money, right? Has nothing at all to do with that. Cool, that's very impressive. Thanks for making this huge pile of dirt to hold all this water. But what are you talking about? That's not what my question was. My question is, how do I manage my month-to-month cash flow, my year-to-year cash flow? How do I start my own business? How do I do these things? Where is the best place for my money to reside? I already have water in my little example, right? I have it. It's under the ground. I just need you to get to it. So how do you do that? What is the best way to do that? And it's not to just pile up hundreds of thousands of dollars in some kind of like tax qualified account that's locked away that you have to wait until you retire to touch, right? That's not the solution. People have to make so much more in investments just to make up for the fact that they're giving up all this money and interest now, in their day-to-day and their month-to-month life. So that's a big thing that we see all the time. But also, there's a lot of that, like, okay, what's the minimum? I don't know if I can really afford this. The same sorts of things that I went through. And of course, that's easy to talk about because I had the same problem, But yeah, okay, we can look at the absolute smallest. But once they get it, once they read the book, 'cause I always insist people read the book. Even if you read my book is not a replacement. Read Becoming Your Own Banker, and then let's talk about it. Right? And if they get it, they're going to say, okay, I don't want to do the smallest anymore. I'm restructuring how my money flows, and that is going to make my life better. It's not, I want to do this cool investment that's trendy and like, you're on a libertarian show, so I think that's awesome. And I want, whatever the situation is. It's, oh yeah, okay, I see. I could pay for this using my policy, and then I can make repayment. Oh yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, what else could we do, right? People call me with cool ideas. And they say, hey, what if I had a business and I sold a gift card? And whenever somebody buys a gift card, then I put it in PUAs in my policy, because people don't redeem their gift cards for a long time usually, right? And then whenever I need to take the money back out to redeem the gift card, I pull it out of my policy. I'm like, that's a great idea. Why don't you do that? And so it's the infinite banking concept, right? It's an infinite number of ways that you can deploy your money, an infinite number of ways you can roll this out. You just have to open your brain up to that. I know I'm rambling and ranting on this now, but it's really fun, to have those conversations with people.
So most of your conversation are those virtual telephone calls, Zooms and whatnot, or do you do a lot of face-to-face with clients?
It's very rarely face-to-face. I do like to meet people existing clients, like when we had our, think tank down in Florida. I like to go down to Florida. I know people down in Florida. I have clients in Florida. Let me stay a few extra days. Let me go around and meet some people that I haven't met yet, that kind of thing. But typically, it is people that I've never met face to face. I have about half, I don't remember how many licenses, but about half of the states I have at least one client in. And, so it's kind of fun because if I plan a trip to go somewhere, then I always have somebody to go see, But yeah, it's because of the podcasting and some of those things that I've done. My policy is I never say no to somebody, even if if it costs me more to get the license in that state than I'm going to make to write the policy, I'll still do it because, that person has a need. They've resonated with me in some way. We're getting along. I haven't talked them out of working with me after the first meeting or two, like we're having enough fun on the phone, on video calls like this, that there's something there. So I should do that, even if they end up going, absolute rock bottom budget or something like that. So that's how I've ended up with so many licenses. But yeah, it's just how things have happened. I don't know. I mean, a lot of people do seminars and live things, and that's just never been me. Because I started in this around in the COVID times, so part of it as I couldn't at the beginning. And then once I started doing Zoom calls and all these other things, it's just, wow, I save a lot of time not having to drive an hour each way to go meet somebody. So I'll just keep doing it this way, unless they want an in-person visit. I have Arkansas clients. I'll go see them, but it's way easier for everybody if I don't.
Yeah, I think that's the trend nowadays. It's mostly virtual across the country, big time. So, of course, there's always those prospects that really do want to meet knee to knee, eye to eye, which is great, But hey,
I love it. I mean, I like going to live events and meeting people. Some of the coolest people I've ever met have been just going to, festival, event, different things, and just walking around and talking to people. So I like to do that. It's not really necessarily that I'm prospecting for clients even. It's just something I want to do. I tell my team, because we've got a handful of agents, I tell my team, like, go do something you want to do anyway and meet people that you want to meet anyway. And, a few of those people probably will be interested in what you do, but like, don't do it because you're trying to make money. Just go do it. I don't like the idea of business and personal life being separate things. To me, I'm really good friends with people that I met because they wanted to work with me, and vice versa. People I was already really close with have become clients, but they're not separate boxes. I like them.
That rings truth about niche markets. Figure out who you want to hang out with. Figure out who you enjoy talking to, and those are probably going to be your best clients. So either way, yeah,
absolutely. Well, and you just are meeting people, like you said, with common interests anyway, and so that leads to conversation about, like, what do you do for a living, and that kind of thing. That kind of opens that door, but you already have that common interest in mind from the get-go. And so it just, allows us connections, and it kind of brings together also like-minded people in a way as well. So I think that's really important for new practitioners to hear that don't go out there and feel like you have to reinvent the wheel on finding people to work with. So, that's a great piece of advice there. How else would you say that you have grown in your practice since you became an authorized IBC practitioner?
I mean, there's a lot of ways I guess I could answer that, but I think the spirit in which the question was asked is, I would say getting out there and podcasting is like the best thing. We talked about this just ever so briefly before we started, but, going on the Tom Woods show was a huge deal for me, and for a long time, I thought, man, someday I'm going to be cool and interesting enough. I'm going to have something that I've done that's cool to where I can go on the Tom Woods show. Because I used to listen to every single episode of that show, and I was very much in the kind of libertarian world. And, so not just his show, but a bunch of others. I just thought that if only I could be in front of that audience for something that I was doing, because those are my people. I don't know them all. They're behind, headphones and screens and whatever, listening to the same show, but I can't reach them. So maybe someday I'll have something cool to talk about. And I guess, it became that this was right after my book came out, that I got on the show for the first time. And that was a big deal, but other shows too, even before the book came out, it's just, hey, we're all talking about how we, don't mistrust the government in different ways or whatever. Maybe we shouldn't follow exactly like to a T the financial advice that the government is giving us. Are you willing to consider, that maybe we could do something a little different? And that's kind of my initial, pitch with that kind of crowd. And it doesn't have to be anything, totally insane. It's, it doesn't have to be about cryptocurrency and all this other stuff and moving to some other country where the laws are different or whatever. It's, you don't have to do that. What if you could just treat the money you already have a little differently, But, podcasting has been a huge, huge deal. And then, find like the way that you're best at communicating. I was the shyest person on the literal face of the earth. Okay. When I was a kid, I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to have any conversations. And I had to work really, really hard to get to where I could do anything like this. 20 years ago, this would have terrified me to my core. And I would have said, absolutely not. And probably never talk to you again, But nowadays, I like doing this. I found that that's really energizing for me. And I, worked on that. But I like to write. I've always liked to write. My mom writes. And she writes fiction. And of course, I wrote nonfiction. But, I found that I thought I could do a decent job of conveying information, like complex topics. People have always told me all my life, you're really good at taking complex, difficult stuff and breaking it down and helping me understand it. I had to tutor other kids in school and stuff, like not because I was selling tutoring services, but because people would say, Luke, show me how to do this, And so I did. And I'm a teacher at heart, And so eventually I said, well, I'm going to write a book. And so I did. But that's not for everybody. My point with that comment is not to say everybody who gets into finance as a career needs to write a book. That's not the point. The point is, how do you best reach people? There are lots of people who are better at video than me. I like video editing, but I'm not the best, video like creator. I do video, but my book has been way more successful than the YouTube channel, So, but if that's you, if you're better in front of a camera than me, if you have a lot to say, if you're very natural, free flowing, you can record vlog style stuff just all day, every day, do it, go find your way that you reach people. And maybe that's seminars, and maybe that's, taking everybody out from this company to dinner and talking about stuff, in a restaurant. I don't know. People are very different from me. I find that I have very little in common with a lot of people, but I like to write, and I enjoyed the process of doing that. And so, hence writing a book. That has been a huge deal. And once you kind of have that, it doesn't matter what you do, whichever of those paths you take, once you have something that you've done that's, got your name on it, then that is a way that you exist, whether you're, asleep or awake. You're out there in perpetuity. People can find that thing, that blog article or whatever, and learn who you are and if they agree with you, right? The point of your website, your funnel, whatever, if you're in this business, is to get rid of people you don't want to talk to. There's hundreds of millions of people out there. I don't want to talk to most of them. I want to talk to people I like. And so, don't put your opinions out there. Be vocal about who you are and why you are that way, so that people will not talk to you and waste your time, and you won't waste their time. Like, it's not helping anyone to try to appeal to the entire U.S. market. They don't want to work with you. So don't, you know? So I think that's maybe my first pass answer at that question.
Right. Well, you've mentioned your book. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So it's called Between the Lies, How to Reclaim Your Future from the Banks and Wall Street. And it's very simple format. The first third of the book is about how your brain works and why banks are not your friend. It's what the major chapter sections are called, but the bank is not your friend. The second part is about Wall Street and how Wall Street is not your friend. And then the third part is, what do you do about that? Given that there is a lot of stuff that is out there that is not in your corner, it's telling you, oh, do this and you're going to become a multimillionaire and it's super easy and you don't have to worry about it. But since that isn't true and it's demonstrable that it's not true, you can't just follow the advice and be totally hands off with your financial life and end up in like the best possible circumstances. It doesn't work that way, even when people tell you that it does work that way. So given all that, what do you do about it? And we have what I call the truth blueprint in the back of the book. It's the very, very end, talking about 5 steps that I recommend taking in order to, deal with that. And so it's truth is an acronym. So it's take responsibility, reclaim your money, undo your debts, transcend your expenses, and help others. And so in that order, right? So take responsibility. You've got to open your brain a little bit. You've got to stop, waiting for the government or anybody else to come fix things for you, change the financial system into the Federal Reserve. Like, you can't just wait around for these things. And so, take responsibility for it. It's your problem. You've got to deal with it. Reclaim your money is the IBC chapter. You have to understand that now that you have responsibility, now you can take control of the money in your life in a real way. It's capital that you can deploy to do the things you need to do. Undo your debts. Pretty straightforward. Get out of debt. At least to banks, right? Manage your own debt obligations, right? Take policy loans, use those things. And then transcend your expenses. Find and develop income sources. Not just put your money in the stock market and try to make this big pile of money in a tax qualified plan, but, develop passive income, maybe it's real estate, maybe it's not. Maybe you have a pool cleaning route or several, maybe, I don't know. I have a client that has a pool cleaning route he uses policy for. And so that's a cool little thing. I have a client that has a piano tuning business, right? And so that's the coolest thing that I've ever heard. But, that kind of stuff, develop things, a business that you own is worth way more than just buying Coca-Cola stock or whatever, right? It gives you a lot more options and control. And then the last step, help others, is, get your estate in order. Make sure that these things are going to be intergenerational. Make sure that the education, all the stuff that you've learned and figured out, passes on to the next generation. Don't just give them a big check from your life insurance policies. Give them a big check and make sure they know what to do with it. How can they continue to do the right things with the money when they get it? How can you make that? My big thing with like libertarians and stuff, people that value human freedom, is what I like to say. Those people need to have the resources to have an impact on the culture, right? And how do you do that? Well, you manage your money better. Pay attention and learn and have enough resources to be able to have an influence in the conversation on the culture. And so, that's basically it. It's not anything crazy. It's just, don't go to the end first. Don't just focus on passive income. Don't just focus, it's not one of those things. It's all of those things and it's in sequence. And so that's my book. It's how your brain works is the very, very beginning, not the same stuff that Nelson would say. It's not that it's in disagreement, but how do you manifest what you're trying to do in the world? It's a little bit different, just kind of aspects of the human psyche that I focus on a little bit there. And then, why are these things out there that are against you? Banks, Wall Street. And what do you do about it? So, yeah, it's been extremely, extremely successful. We had a bestseller on Amazon for weeks and weeks and weeks. So, it was great.
Talk to us a little bit about, you've talked about think tanks, attending think tanks, and that's kind of our annual conference. Why is that important to you to be with other authorized IBC practitioners and make those connections with other practitioners in the community?
The think tank, like I don't do a lot of traveling. I was talking earlier about if I go anywhere, I have somebody to go see, and I'll try to make plans to go places. But a lot of times it's, we've got something crazy going on. We're trying to get our nephew out of foster care right now. And so like, I'm not traveling right now unless it's to go see him or something. And so, we're pretty much homebodies, but I love the think tank. I've been 3 times now. I can't claim that I've been to every single one like some of the guys, but because I didn't know about it back then. But, I've loved every single one that I've gone to, every single one that's happened since I've been involved. And it's so refreshing because you walk into a room full of, just general people, like you go to a Rangers game or something, and it's like, you don't know who you're sitting next to, like they might completely hate your worldview if you actually talked about it, right? But if you go to the think tank, like there's a lot of commonalities in that room. It's a lot of really high IQ people too. And, just intelligent. They've gone through the same kind of struggle to like master the material. A lot of them knew Nelson. And so I feel like I've gotten to know Nelson a lot better, even though I've only met him really, really briefly. I get to kind of absorb that vicariously from the other people that have known him, people like Mike Everett and, just talking about experiences with Nelson. Like I know how he talks, even though I haven't heard him speak that much. And things like the YouTube videos and stuff like that have helped in that regard too. But it's, there's such a commitment to Nelson's message and his teachings and his lesson and his book, books, I should say. And, the things that he did and the ideas that he had, it's just so reassuring and such a like weight off of your shoulders every time you go to be around other people who get it. I don't have to convince anybody in here, right? We can trade stories about other clients that have, what their struggles were, how they walked through these objections and that kind of thing. Because it's not, IBC is not trying to make a sale. Like, yes, I earn a commission, when somebody gets a life insurance policy, but it's the reward is when somebody gets it and they say, oh yeah, okay, and they light up. And, I had one of my own clients send me a thank you card the other day, just kind of out of the blue. We worked together like a year and a half ago or so. And just, a little reassuring little message saying, thank you so much, because it's changed his life. And it's like, I promise it'll change your life if you learn this stuff and people actually take me seriously. It's great. But think tank is it's every speaker is great every time that I've gone. Every session is great. All the brainstorming, all the stuff that comes out from that, we're all moving in the right direction together and reaching more people as a result of that. And so, again, like by reaching more people, it's just we're converting hearts and minds. It's not, funneling customers to me. That's not the point. The point is we're changing the financial conversation in the US and Canada, with what people understand as being correct, true, foundational ideas about money. And that is not an easy thing to do, so for such a small team of people to have such a big impact, it's phenomenal.
Well, thank you for sharing about that. I think some people have, just questions about, why should I become an authorized IBC practitioner? What's the benefit of that? Why should I attend a think tank? I don't love traveling, why, but so thank you for sharing, your perspective on that. I appreciate that. Well, Luke, as we wrap up our time together, we like to ask everyone to end by sharing, what does the infinite banking concept mean to you?
Infinite banking, to me, it's just a way to pull yourself out of all of these like systems of frustration that are in your life. I do not like being told what to do. Okay. If anybody knows me, I don't like to stand in lines. I don't like to, call the, Department of, anything on the phone and like wait on hold forever. I don't like playing those games. And, when you are kind of plugged into the matrix and you're dealing with the regular financial system and the way that they want you to do everything, you have to listen to so many disclaimers and you have to ask permission for things. You kind of get told how you're allowed to interface with the world of money. If anybody has ever tried to like cancel a 401k plan or something, you call and like, well, we have to read you this disclosure verbatim, and then we have to send you this letter, and you have to receive it, and we have to wait 3 days, and then we can sell you out of stocks, and then we can mail you a check, but we're going to have to withhold all this money. It's just on and on and on and on and on. It's awful, right? But that's ostensibly my money, right? And so infinite banking is actually my money. It's like I actually have control over how I'm running my life, and in such a big way that you go like, why would anyone ever want to do anything else? And so, me, I could ramble about this for a very, very long time, but in really, really short terms, like I don't want to play that game, and I don't have to. That's what it means to me.
Well, thank you, Luke. We really appreciate you. We thank you for, continuing to spread the message about the infinite banking concept.